Good evening. Where are you guys calling in from tonight? So one's in St. Louis probably. Give it another minute to let people log on. Awesome. How's weather in New Hampshire? And you got Memphis. Memphis is probably close to what St. Louis weather is right now, kind of 30s, 40s. And Atlanta. Been to that airport more times than I can count. Windy. All right, well, thank you for being the early birds. This will be recorded as always. This will be up on my IGTV when we're done chatting tonight. And then also going to be recording this in a different format, potentially putting this up on YouTube, long-wise. So, for those that don't know me, I'm Dr. Michael Twyman. I'm a board-certified cardiologist. My passion really is heart attack and stroke prevention. And I got into the biohacking scene in 2017 when I realized that I didn't want to die from a 14-hour flight to Asia, and it was, the jet lag was going to be really bad. So found these glasses. Hello, thank you for joining. Found these glasses that filter out certain wavelengths of blue light, and it helped with sleep, and the jet lag wasn't as bad. So spent the past couple of years going deep down the rabbit hole on how to optimize your mitochondrial health, and in the summer of 2019 launched my own practice, Apollo Cardiology in St. Louis. So as I mentioned, my focus is on heart attack and stroke prevention. I can take care of you if you've had a heart attack or, don't ever want to have one. I prefer to have the latter. But, people kind of get, stuck on thinking it's all about their cholesterol, their blood pressure. While those are important, there's up to 400 different things that will actually, ultimately lead to plaque formation in your heart arteries or your carotid arteries or your femoral arteries. But the place where it starts is with something called endothelial dysfunction. So the endothelium is the inner lining of your blood vessels. It's one cell thick, and if you laid out all your endothelium, it's a surface area of 6 tennis courts. So it's one of your largest organs, definitely one of the largest endocrine organs. And the main thing from a vascular standpoint that it produces is something called nitric oxide. Nitric oxide is a gas. It's very short-lived, but a couple things it does for the vascular system is it vasodilates the arteries, so the arteries get bigger. It also prevents stuff from sticking to the artery walls. So adhesion, leukocyte adhesion, so white blood cells don't stick to the walls and don't kind of get through the, it's not pores per se, but get through the wall of the artery and start getting stuck in the walls of the artery. And it basically acts like Teflon. The endothelium is a sensor. It's sensing the environment. It's sensing your blood pressure. It's sensing whatever chemicals are floating through the lumen of your blood vessels. So your endothelium is your first line of defense before plaque will build up in the walls of the artery. The endothelial dysfunction may happen 6-7 years or longer before plaque will actually develop in your arteries. So if you're a younger person, never had a heart attack or stroke, endothelial dysfunction is the first thing, then the thickening of your arteries, usually in your carotid, also in your coronary arteries, then the plaque starts forming. And then if you don't stop the process, potentially the plaque will rupture. The plaque is like a little pimple on the wall of the artery, gets red hot and inflamed, spills out its contents in the bloodstream, and a blood clot forms. And that's what a heart attack or stroke is. So you want to stop that process way ahead of time. If you've already had a heart attack, stroke, then it's all about restoring your nitric oxide function so that your endothelium becomes healthy again and that you don't have a second event. So tonight we're going to talk a little bit about nitric oxide production and what you can do to optimize it. So in my office here in St. Louis, I test endothelial function routinely. There's 2 major tests that we do in the office, but we'll talk about some stuff that you can do outside the office as well. So as mentioned earlier, nitric oxide is a gas that dilates your blood vessels. When you're younger, it's mostly L-arginine that gets converted into nitric oxide. As you age, approximately 50% of your nitric oxide production decreases. So your arteries are aging because your arteries can't make as much nitric oxide as when you were in your 20s or 30s. And This is why when you're older, taking a bunch of extra L-arginine probably isn't wise. You're probably not going to get the benefit. The enzyme that converts that isn't working as efficiently. But you have a backup pathway that's in your salivary glands, essentially, is that nitrates and nitrites in dietary form, you eat them, they get absorbed, the stomach acid breaks it down, gets into the gut, some of that goes back into the salivary glands, and then the bacteria that are in your mouth convert the nitrates into nitrites. Humans don't have an enzyme that converts the nitrates to nitrites. I don't know if we've ever had that, but we don't currently have it. So you need these bacteria in your mouth to be able to do that. That then will convert ultimately into nitric oxide. So there's ways that you can test that. There are these test strips from a company called Human, like a litmus paper, has little different colors. You take the little test strip, put saliva on it, and then look at the color. And then if it's light pink, your body's not making a lot of nitric oxide. If it's really dark, you are making a lot of nitric oxide, and you want to be high on the nitric oxide. So, we'll get into some of the other treatments in a moment, but, blood work that you can do to see, are you likely having healthy endothelium? There's a test called ADMA and SDMA. The ADMA stands for asymmetric dimethylarginine, and the SDMA stands for symmetric dimethylarginine. Both of those block or compete with an enzyme that will make the L-arginine into nitric oxide. So you can think of it, if you have high ADMA or SDMA, you're going to have low nitric oxide. So you can see that on blood markers. And then just systemically, if you have inflammation, so you have a high sensitivity CRP that's elevated, high myeloperoxidase, high LPPLA2, high vascular inflammation, you're going to not make as much nitric oxide because it interferes with the enzymes that convert the nitrites into nitric oxide. The other thing that you can look at on a blood test is something called oxidized Ldl, and now there's also a test called oxidized phospholipid on ApoB. If either of the ones are elevated, then your body is basically rusting from the inside. And when you have high oxidation, these enzymes don't work well. You have low nitric oxide. There's a urine test called F2-isoprostane over creatinine that looks at how much oxidative stress is in your whole system. If that level is high, again, you're going to have low nitric oxide. I mentioned earlier, heart disease is much more than just hypertension and high cholesterol, but those are important. But if you have high blood pressure, it's due to low nitric oxide. It's almost pathognomonic. If you have low nitric oxide, you're going to have higher blood pressure. So how do you improve your nitric oxide? We'll talk about that. Having high lipids by itself isn't the issue, but if your lipids are getting oxidized, now that damaged cholesterol will directly inhibit nitric oxide production. Diabetes can also affect the enzyme, the eNOS is the name of the enzyme, and when that enzyme's messed up, you don't make, again, a lot of nitric oxide. Obesity is also a risk factor. It may be due to adiponectin, which is a hormone that in obesity is low, and higher levels of adiponectin actually cause the arteries to release nitric oxide. And everybody knows smoking is more than just the nicotine. It's all the other toxins that are in the inhaled smoke, destroys biopterin, and lowers your vitamin C, two things that are needed as cofactors for the enzyme. So smoking is going to cause lower nitric oxide. So talked about having salivary strips. That's kind of a quick and dirty way to look. There's some blood markers you can look. And then there's two tests that we do in our office. One test is called a max pulse. It's looking at pulse wave velocity. It's essentially putting a pulse ox on your finger, and it's looking at the flow in the small blood vessels of your finger. Your blood vessels, if they're healthy, act like as an accordion. The blood goes down in there and they expand out and contract very quickly. If you have old arteries that are more calcified or stiff, the blood goes through there really fast. And you can measure the rise of each heartbeat essentially in the fingertip blood vessels and see how fast it's rising up and down and responding. That gives you, again, what's something called their pulse wave velocity. So if you have young arteries, your arteries are very springy essentially. If you have old arteries, they're like a concrete pipe. So that test will give you an idea if your arteries can make nitric oxide. And then the gold standards are having wires up in your heart and giving you different intravenous medications to see how much your coronary arteries can dilate. But that is not something the average person can sign up for. So the best non-invasive test, there's a test called the flow mediate dilation. It's with an ultrasound, not used as much, but the one that's kind of supplanted it for most preventive cardiologists is something called the Endopath. Again, it's measuring different flow parameters in your fingertips. 15-minute test, basically a stress test for your blood vessels. There's 5 minutes where we use a blood pressure cuff to basically cut the blood flow off to the arm for a moment. It pins a needle sensation in your hand. And then when you open up the blood pressure cuff, the blood rushes back down into the hand. And if you have healthy arteries, as that blood flow rolls back into the hand, it's hitting all these little branches of your blood vessels. And you get something known as shear stress. As that shear stress happens, those arteries release more nitric oxide to accept that volume of blood coming back down into the hand. And your arteries should dilate by 2, so 200% dilation of your arteries would be optimal. If you're less than basically 1.68 or 168%, you have endothelial dysfunction and more likely to end up with hypertension, strokes, heart attacks, heart failure. So that's the test we do at Apollo Cardiology to tell you essentially how old are your arteries and what's going on with them right now from a health standpoint. What are some things you can do to optimize your nitric oxide production? When you're younger, you basically are a little bit easier. When you're older, you've lost 50% of the capacity to make nitric oxide, so you might have to do more as you age if you don't want to age in a negative way. But starts with, sunlight, UVA sunlight hitting your skin. Your skin is a solar panel. That UVA light will hit your skin. The blood vessels will come up to the surface to accept that wavelength of light, and they release nitric oxide to accept it. The wavelength of light actually induces the nitric oxide release. Other things, exercise. Exercise does it most likely because the blood is flowing down into the vessels and you're getting shear stress and they have to release nitric oxide to accept that volume of blood. From foodstuffs, it's mostly green leafy vegetables, so spinach, kale, high dietary nitrates and nitrites. Beets also can do that. There are supplements that have beetroot powder in it. There is a company that makes one that is more proprietary that has a special thing where actually the nitric oxide is released with a lozenge and also helps reactivate the enzyme that gets broken in some people. So there's a lot of interesting clinical trials on that lozenge that endothelial function is improving with it. And then other than that, it's mostly going to be medications. There's pharmaceuticals, things that block angiotensin 2 will do it, because if you block angiotensin 2, nitric oxide is going to work better. So that's going to be the ACE inhibitors and the angiotensin receptor blockers. Most beta blockers are not going to do it, but nebivolol can improve nitric oxide production. There is some data on a substance called Arteries. Have not yet used it in many patients, but it helps with protection of the glycocalyx of the endothelium. Literally something I only really started reading about in the past few weeks. The glycocalyx is basically a hairy coating on top of the endothelium, and when it gets damaged, then the endothelium is getting damaged. So the same things that fix the endothelium tend to support the glycocalyx, but there's a product that apparently helps this glycocalyx repair itself. It's kind of like it's almost like seaweed consistency, and the things help regenerate these little fingery things that protect the endothelium. So that's what I wanted to share with you guys tonight about how nitric oxide is very important for arterial health. You're as old as your arteries, as William Osler says, Dr. Osler. So nitric oxide production is key to longevity. So if you've never had a heart attack or stroke and don't ever want to have one, you need to know how much nitric oxide your arteries can produce. And there's ways that you can do it. The salivary strips is a good spot check. Blood work can tell you, is your body likely not having a lot of nitric oxide because you have high inflammation, high oxidative stress. And then you can do the more sensitive testing, the max pulse, the Endopath, to know the exact percentage of how stiff or diseased your arteries are. If you've already had a heart attack or stroke it's still very important to improve your nitric oxide production and maintain it at a good level. So I want to thank you guys for all joining, and open it up to any questions you have tonight. Just waving back at some people. So how's Tampa tonight, Tom? Oh yeah, okay. Yeah, 2 people asked about the mouthwash, so I did leave that part out, so sorry about that. So earlier I was talking about that dietary nitrates will get ultimately converted into nitric oxide through a pathway. But your body needs the bacteria in your mouth to be able to do that conversion. So if you're using antiseptic mouthwash, you're killing off the good bacteria that can make that conversion happen. So if you have vascular disease, you have hypertension, it's probably because you have low nitric oxide. You do not want to be using mouthwash. Brushing your teeth is fine, but you don't want to kill off all the good bacteria that are in your mouth. The second thing that you need to be mindful of is if you're on a proton pump inhibitor, or PPI. So there's times and places that proton pump inhibitors are very useful. You've had a stomach ulcer, you're on do antiplatelet therapy because you just got a stent, and they put you on this to reduce the risk of bleeding while you're on do antiplatelet therapy. Got it. But if you're on PPI for 8 years because you just had bad acid reflux because you've never addressed your nutrition, you don't sleep well, whatever is messing up your ability not to have acid reflux, there's some downstream negative effects of being on long-standing proton pump inhibitor. So in order for your body to be able to make this nitric oxide from foodstuffs, it needs to be digested by the acid. If the proton pump inhibitor knocks your acid levels down, that process is broken and you're not going to make nitric oxide. So this is probably one of the roundabout ways where proton pump inhibitors can increase hypertension and vascular disease. So this is a good question. I've not actually read the book yet, but I've seen enough people talk about it that it probably does have something to dig into to really look at the research. But question about does breathing through the nose improve nitric oxide? Like I said, I've seen some people talking about it. I would imagine it's probably because if you got your mouth closed, you're not oxidizing the bacteria that are in your mouth as much, and the air is going straight down into your lungs. That probably is how I would imagine it happening. So a question about shouldn't be eating foods with nitrates as preservatives, i.e. cured bacon. Is that accurate, or should I be getting that more through vegetables? So it's a kind of a gray area. Definitely want to get through more, let's say natural, less processed sources. But if it's a, organic, natural preserved item, that shouldn't be an issue. But do need to be mindful that some people, it can cause some fluid retention and cause, increasing of blood pressure. So if you're somebody who already has hypertension, if your blood pressure is going up, then that's not for you. Welcome. So for those just joining, we're going through the Q&A section. So I did talk about how endothelial dysfunction starts and what you can do to test it and what you can do to try to improve it. And I'll have this up on the replay soon. Oh, you're welcome. Look forward to coming down to Tampa and getting some UVA in a couple weeks. Welcome. So somebody asking for a plan for somebody who's already had a heart attack and how to ensure nitric oxide production is optimal. So it's a comprehensive plan that looks at what you're currently doing from a lifestyle, how much are you exercising, what does your nutrition look like, and then on physical exam, what is your blood pressure, what is your pulse pressure, so the difference between the top number and the bottom number gives you an idea for that. Then doing types of tests like the salivary strips, we can do those in our office. Blood work is very important to look at how much inflammation is in the system, so high sensitivity CRP, mild peroxidase, LP-PLA2 off the top of my head. For oxidation, looking at either oxidized Ldl or oxidized phospholipid on ApoB, and also the F2 isoprostane creatinine urine test tells you basically are you rusting from the inside. You can also look at asymmetric dimethylarginine and symmetric dimethylarginine, ADMA and SDMA, gives you an idea how much your body is able to use arginine to make nitric oxide. And then everybody in my office now is going to be starting to get the max pulse test, who's at least a new patient. The follow-up patients, I'll probably roll it in the near future. But the max pulse test gives you an idea how stiff the arteries are. And then for people who've had an event that early, I would definitely recommend doing the formal endothelial function test with something like the Endopath test. And then find out what the results are, see how much the arteries can dilate. Can they dilate 50%, 100%, 200%? If it's 200%, okay, the endothelial function is improved and you're less likely to have further events because that endothelium can start repairing itself, and your arteries then don't have things that start sticking to them, building up new plaques, or less likely to rupture old plaques. So that's what I would start with, is figuring out how much the artery can dilate at this point, and then coming up with a plan from optimizing your lifestyle, supplements, and then potentially medications as needed. But if you're interested in learning more about that, just shoot me a message on Instagram, or my office is Apollo Cardiology. That's the website, apollocardiology.com. You can also go to drtwyman.com, drtwyman.com. Oh, you're welcome. So I don't know if I've seen this particular study you're mentioning. There's, I don't know, 3,000 studies that come out every day. But question about a recent study suggesting limiting meat intake. It would really depend on what, there's no such thing as meat per se. It depends on what they're testing. So you're right, is it industrialized versus, free range, and, is it beef, pork, chicken, so I'm a little agnostic on the source of protein at this moment, but the key is getting enough protein to maintain your muscle mass. Your muscle is, your metabolic engine. If you don't have enough muscle, you're going to not age well. And if you don't have muscle mass, you're probably not going to be exercising much. If you don't exercise much, you're probably not going to have as good of endothelial function. So it's kind of a long about route, but you definitely need to get, bare minimum 90 grams of protein a day. And if you're getting that through a meat-based source, from my standpoint, that's going to be fine. Everybody, is individual, so sometimes there are certain genetics that make that not the right choice for you, and I usually will be able to pick that up on advanced blood testing. But I don't have a concern for the majority of people eating meat. Question, do infrared saunas increase nitric oxide? Probably not directly. Photobiomodulation, like this red light behind me, and the near-infrared that the saunas put out, they can knock nitric oxide off cytochrome C oxidase, one of the cytochromes in your mitochondrial respiratory chain, and that can help energy flow in the mitochondria more efficiently. And so the nitric oxide will diffuse out, but it's very short-lived, so I don't know how much of it's truly going to get out of the mitochondria and then get to the arteries and really dilate them. So it is beneficial. You do get vasodilation or dilation of the arteries with saunas. All right. Well, there aren't any other questions coming in. I'll start wrapping up. So I do these chats every Monday night, 6 o'clock Central Standard Time. Previous weeks we talked about sleep, nutrition, exercise, stress relief. Probably will stick on the kind of cardiovascular topics for this month. We'll talk about some of the imaging tests that you can get done to look at the health of the arteries if your endothelium isn't healthy. And we'll talk about some of the other options for more integrative or functional medicine looks for cardiovascular issues. Don't know exactly what the question is on the niacin flush. I know some people will take it, prior to going in the sauna to help with the sweating. But the niacin causes flushing because it affects prostaglandins. The flush, is not an allergic reaction, but it can be uncomfortable for people. The flush feels like pins and needle sensation or a hot flash for some. So niacin is, useful for certain issues from a lipid standpoint, but I don't necessarily, blanket recommend people take niacin for sauna use. You're very welcome. Thank you for joining tonight. All right. Well, I hope you guys have a great rest of the week. Hopefully it's going to stay almost like spring here in St. Louis and get outside. Currently doing 75 hard, so today's day 8. So follow me on Instagram. You'll see more of my stories about 75 hard, but requires 2 exercise rounds a day, each 45 minutes long, and one of them must be outside. So right now doing that morning outside hike about 5:55 a.m. So gonna go to bed at a reasonable time and be ready for that tomorrow. So hope you guys have a good week, and I'll see you again next time. Take care.